We've invited Buff Grace. He's the director of Faith Networks at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. So, Buff, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic work by St. Luke's on choosing to go carbon neutral by 2040. Fantastic job. Love seeing all your ecological work in restoring your grounds and the solar panels you have on your roof. Fantastic congregation and community. As Judy said, we're going to talk about individual work today. Just to mention, there we go. I'm with an organization called Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We've partnered with you all in some other ways. We think people of faith have a critical voice in the discussion about climate change and the response to it. And we believe that communities of faith can heal the world. Today, I'll be showing some slides or some websites, and we'll follow up with an email that'll give you the links to all the things that I show here, including this recording and the slides from this presentation. Let's start by asking you, when you think about your values and the values of St. Luke's, what are some of the things that come to mind that guide you about how you care for and use the wealth that you've been given in the world? And I've got let's see, we've got a mic here. You can share that around so folks on Zoom can hear.
So I think we're asked to use our wealth and money for the good of the world and to support others and to be good stewards of the earth.
I would agree. Yeah. Thoughtful, responsible folks be good stewards of the earth and use our money for good. Yeah. What other values come to mind? Kind of sums it up there, huh?
Yeah, helping people that are needier.
Helping people that are needier. Right. Sharing the wealth. Anybody on Zoom want to make a comment? All right. Great. Well, we do have a lot of teaching. Some folks say that the teachings about wealth and poverty in our scriptures, in the Christian scriptures, are more than any other topic. I don't know. I haven't checked that out, but there is a lot of attention given to how we use the abundance that we've been given. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that oftentimes in the parables that we find that Jesus of Nazareth told, they're just outlandish sums of wealth. Sometimes the parables involve just enormous, much more than anybody could earn in an entire lifetime are the sums that Jesus uses in the parables. It's kind of funny about that. We're going to talk about divestment today. We're going to talk about divestment. Divestment is just simply put, redirecting financial resources away from, in this case, the fossil fuel industry. And they can be done by individuals or institutions, communities. It can refer to a variety of financial mechanisms that support fossil fuels. Divestment may be a word that you remember from the 80s when it was very common for folks to be divesting from South African investments that supported apartheid. That is one place in our lexicon in the US where that's commonly used. But divestment can refer to pulling financial resources away from any particular thing. And in this case, we're talking about fossil fuels. It can target bank accounts, credit cards, loans with institutions, insurance companies that are insuring fossil fuel projects, investments that direct shares of fossil fuel company stock or those types of things. Anything in that realm is what we're talking about. So today we're going to talk primarily about your individual level. As Judy said and mentioned, there have been some institutional things that the Presbyterian Church and other religious institutions have done. I'm going to talk about pulling all your financial abundance out of fossil fuels, but I do want to make a note that some folks want to keep their stocks in fossil fuels because they are doing specific shareholder advocacy. And there is some real benefit to doing that. And there's some examples that show that that makes a big difference, that folks that have shares show up for stockholder meetings and organize as stockholders who want specific change in the companies that they hold stock in. That is a valid and good way of doing things. But if you're just simply holding the stocks but not doing the activism, it's a better idea to pull your financial resources out of those companies. If we think about the abundance of the planet, it all comes from the sun. It all originates somewhere in the sun. Nothing really happens without the sun. And so we can think about all the abundance that we have, financial or otherwise, as ultimately derivative from the sun. In the same way that we might say within our spiritual lives that all sustenance comes from God. What that means for us is that the story of humanity over the last 200 years is that we just weren't satisfied with the amount of energy that comes from the sun. Even though it's enormous, we also wanted the energy that came from the sun millions of years ago. And that energy was kind of concentrated in these fossil fuels underneath the Earth's surface. So we mined those and we pulled them out and we burned them because as a species, we just weren't satisfied with the way things were. We needed more. And that has allowed an enormous growth, an enormous expansion of life expectancy. It's been fantastic in so many ways. We've created unbelievable products and technology by doing that. And we are also finding out that we created a lot of harm, and we're facing some pretty catastrophic problems. So at the most basic, simplistic explanation of what that means is we have created a greenhouse effect in our atmosphere. Think about the atmosphere. It's actually a very thin band of life around the planet. It's relatively, not paper thin, but pretty close to paper thin when you consider the whole planet. And for millennia, eons, that energy that came from the sun bounced back out radiated back out into space at a good, consistent rate that allowed us to maintain a kind of a static level of sustenance. But by adding too much carbon to the atmosphere, we've trapped more of that heat, and we're heating up the planet in ways that are going to lead to species extinction, including our own, if we're not careful. So the two biggest things that lead to that greenhouse effect are the nitrous oxide, gasolines, and the carbon dioxide and methane and stuff that we burn from fossil fuels. So why would you want to divest? Well, one thing is that it's actually working. So, we've done a lot of things. You all at St. Luke's have done a lot of things to reduce your carbon emissions. Maybe you do something different about the way you travel or the way you heat your home or the way you burn fossil fuels. And this quote from Bill McKibben reminds us that another important way, equally important as those changes of behavior, is to change where our finances are. So why might we want to divest from fossil fuels? Well, in a basic, linear, most logical fashion, we can say the Earth's natural systems are compromised and face systemic collapse from climate change. Fossil fuel combustion accounts for more than 80% of those greenhouse gases that are leading to that systemic collapse. We have values that show that we want to manage our abundance in ways that support life, and particularly those on the margins and the least of these. And divestment is actually a tool that can actually work. It is shown to actually make a difference in the climate change. So, if all those first three items were true, but it didn't actually work, we might say, well, why do it then? It's not actually making a difference. But we can show that things are really making a difference. Another quote from Bill McKibben, the movement has grown so large, the movement of divestment, that it's now also testing the ability of some of these fossil fuel companies to even raise capital. And as of 2017, Peabody was listing divestment as a major concern. By the next year, Shell was warning shareholders that the campaign could have material adverse effects on the price of our securities and our ability to access equity capital markets. So, and why is this the case? Well, that's because about 5 to 7 years ago, people got really serious about this at institutional levels. And the Presbyterian Church is one of them. But many churches, many religious institutions began divesting at large scale levels with pension funds, endowments, that kind of thing. And you could see we made an enormous difference. $40.43 trillion has been divested from fossil fuels over the last 10 years. Faith organizations lead the pack in institutions that are doing that. So if you ever wondered whether, our little seemingly diminishing mainline Christian organizations across the land are making a difference, you can see, well, actually, we are making a difference. We're part of an enormous group of faith people all around the world that are divesting from fossil fuels, and we're we're 35% of that pie. So we ought to be able to do it at an individual level as well. Divest Invest is a fantastic website that has a lot of tools. I'll be showing a little of that a little bit later, but they proudly display on the front page of their website that we are making a difference, that this is working to fight climate change. It's interesting that the person who started Standard Oil, Rockefeller, back in the early part of the 1900s, partly got us into this mess, said we're confident that, or the Rockefeller Foundation is now saying, we're confident that sound portfolios can be created without exposure to fossil fuels, and our investment performance since 2014 supports that belief. So you don't have to sacrifice returns to get out of fossil fuels. You can still have good investments that still give you good returns on your financial investments, which I know is very important for some of us who are retired and who are dependent on our investments for our livelihood. He also said, John D. Rockefeller, who started Standard Oil, said, I've never let any catastrophe get away from being a good opportunity. So here's our chance to turn the climate change catastrophe into something that's a good opportunity. We can also see some of these other big institutions noticing that fossil fuels have a diminishing timeline. BlackRock, no investors found significant negative performance from divestment, but rather have reported neutral to positive results. Fossil fuel stocks now regularly underperform the market. That may have changed a little bit in the last 6 months with the shifts in Ukraine and how that has shifted the global market. But you can bet fossil fuels are going away. They are not long-term good investments. More and more companies are claiming net zero goals, an important signal that the pressure from the movement is effective and is expanding. Except many of the companies that claim kind of net zero goals don't actually have a clear plan to get there. So it's not enough to continue investing in fossil fuel companies that claim they're going to do a good job of getting out of fossil fuels, because many of them are what we call greenwashing. They're stating one thing on the external front and in their advertisements, but they're doing something different in the boardroom and where they actually build their strategic plans. So if you are going to think to stay in fossil fuels as some kind of part of your investment portfolio, you want to make sure that the companies you're investing in are actually doing what they say they're going to do, because many of them are not. In fact, most of them are not. So some opportunities for personal divestment. Bank accounts, very easy to do. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Credit cards, just slightly more difficult than bank accounts. You can take a hit on your credit score if you change your credit card, if you cut up or get rid of one card. So it's just important to note that when you're doing some homework on the credit cards. And then investments can be a lot more complex. And we'll talk a little bit about that you don't have to do it on your own there. So let's talk first about bank accounts. Here are the big banks. The big giant national banks tend to be still connected to fossil fuels. There are ways you can check on these and measure their involvement in fossil fuels. But in general, these are the ones that you want to avoid right here. So if you've got a bank account in one of these banks, you want to start looking at how do I switch my bank account? Good question. Yeah, Lori's asking, can we rank these? Is there a way to know percentage-wise what they're investing in fossil fuels? And the answer is there are some sites that have some statistics on this. It does change, quarter to quarter even. And so it's hard to, it's easier to say, we know all of these folks still have significant parts of their financial portfolios in fossil fuels. I think right now, JP Morgan Chase is up at the top as the worst actor. Yep. Wells Fargo is not far behind. Here's some examples of banks that are not just neutral, but actually really kind of built on the formulation of being banks that are investing in getting away from fossil fuels, investing in renewable energy, technology that's moving us to solve climate change. Some examples there. In general, we can say there's credit unions are typically good for climate change investing. Banks are for-profit. They are beholden to some extent to shareholders, and they tend to be national or regional. Not always, but much more often they're national or regional. Credit unions are nonprofits, so they aren't beholden to shareholders, they're beholden to members, and those members don't receive they're not out for increasing shareholder gains. They're more for thoughtful, locally focused investment. So tend to be credit unions, as a rule of thumb, you can say are better institutions as far as climate change goes. And there's a lot of them, they're growing. They used to be that you could only get into a credit union if you belong to the group that the credit union was for. But more and more you can get in just as an individual. In fact, that my family has its bank accounts with Affinity Credit Union, which is one in the Twin Cities area. Here are some, here's a particular tool. Again, I'm going to share this tool with you. It's developed by some Buddhists and Christians out in New England who were also financial advisors, and they put this little tool together. A lot of the websites I'm going to show today are mutually referential, so they point to each other because they're kind of all aiming for the same thing. But when Nora, maybe you could pull up this website here for us. I'll just show you briefly. Yeah, if you scroll down just a little bit there, you can click this over here on this Mighty Deposits guide. If you click that Mighty Deposit search, yep. So you can go in here to this tool. Yeah, if you click through to the look up your bank, you can actually go in here and search your bank by, you don't have to do this, Nora, but if you were to click in there, you could put Minnetonka or your zip code, and then it's going to pull up all the banks in your area, and it'll kind of give you some data on that. So you can see how that's one way to search. There's also some of those other buttons as we scroll back. Some of those other buttons help you see which banks are really positive, like that slide that I show you with other banks. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. I'll share that link with you. We'll go back to the presentation. Thank you, Nora. So if you have a credit card with Chase or Citibank or Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Capital One, you can be pretty sure that your money is supporting fossil fuels. You almost certainly. There are green credit cards designed specifically to support green initiatives. Some are better than others. You kind of have to do your homework a little bit, but in general, you can say all the ones that are supporting, that claim to support green initiatives are at least neutral, if not doing something good for the planet. Some of those are, you've probably heard recently, the aspiration, this one here, 0, that purports to plant a tree every time a card is swiped. So that's kind of their take. Beneficial State Bank and Amalgamated Bank are just, they don't do anything like that, but they just are generally with banks that are investing in renewable energy and climate change technology. The Green America Bank, I've had that one for 10 years. It's a really good card. And, you know, instead of giving me points for miles to travel on airplanes and burn more fossil fuels or something like that, it stacks up donation dollars. And at the end of the year, I vote on where I want those dollars to go. Or sometimes if you don't vote, they just automatically give it to certain environmental organizations. So that's another way. So that your credit card can do something good for climate change. I won't go to this website right now, but I'll share that with you in a follow-up email. I'll have the links where you can go and search on these credit cards and check out whether your credit card stacks up. Lastly, I want to get to investments. And I want to invite you to think about investments in this way. If kind of using the concept of a plumber, just had a plumber come to my house yesterday and do some work for me and charge me, you know, I really should have been a plumber. I think I would have been a lot, I would have a lot more to invest actually if I had been a plumber. But if you had a plumber come to your house to bid a project, would you feel comfortable saying, look, I don't want you to use any lead pipes? I mean, you would kind of assume that the plumber wasn't going to use lead pipes, right? I mean, at this day and age. But if you saw that the plumber was using a metal pipe and you kind of wondered, you'd feel pretty comfortable just saying, hey, that pipe doesn't have any lead in it, does it? Because I really don't want that in my house if it does. So in a similar way, you should feel comfortable saying to your financial advisor, yeah, I really don't want my abundance that you're working with here supporting fossil fuels. And, you know, you shouldn't feel like, well, I have to know everything about investments and to know how to invest my money in the same way that you wouldn't expect to know how to put together a trap or fix, you know, a clogged drain or whatever. You just know you're going to talk to your plumber and you're going to tell him what your values are and what you want in your house. So in this, now there are folks who are pretty good and do their own plumbing, right? There are some of us that have at least gone on YouTube and seen the videos and figured out how to sweat copper valves and that kind of stuff, or copper joints. But most of us don't. But if you did know how to do that, you might still be pretty savvy about going on and checking out these investments, making sure they're not in fossil fuels. But my point is, you don't have to have gone out and gone to YouTube to figure all that stuff out, or taken courses in plumbing or in financial advising. But you could go to your financial advisor and you could share this with them, which is one of our partners, Green Faith, which is a global group of faith folks around the climate change, has, with the help of financial advisors, developed a kind of oath, a new oath for climate, for financial advisors. And so you could take this to them and say, here are the values that I would like you to use when you are investing my abundance. I would like you to exclude across all investments any assets that include production of fossil fuels, deforestation, et cetera. I would like you to demand real decarbonization without the use of offsets from all investee companies. I'd like you to establish policies that protect indigenous and human rights. I'd like you to invest rapidly in just climate solutions and a just transition. I'd like you to provide all clients fossil fuel and deforestation-free investment options as your default. So this is a way that you can express your values. It's been developed in concert with financial advisors and with people of faith and with climate scientists have all contributed to this. And so you don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to wonder what it is. You could just take this into your financial advisor and say, you know, we're in a new day. Climate change is really happening. We don't have many years. I'd really like, you know, I know you can get just as good returns not using fossil fuels. So would you please subscribe to this when you work with my financial money? And actually, you could say, would you just do this across the board completely? Because if more and more of us do that with our financial advisors, they're going to start to say, wow, this really makes a difference. People are really asking about this. I should increase my abilities in this field and become a better financial investor and advisor in this way. But if you don't work with a financial advisor, or if you want to kind of work in parallel with your financial advisor, you can go to this website. And Nora, if you don't mind, if you would click on that and bring up that fossil free funds website. So again, these are going to be mutually self-referential with all the different websites I send you. So a number of websites that I send you will ultimately point you to this website. It was developed by As You Sow, which is, I believe it's a Mennonite group that has worked on this over a number of years. Maybe just type in like TIAA in that ticker thing and let's see what comes up. Yep. There you go. So you can kind of scroll down and you can see this is a very robust site. If you are somebody that is sophisticated and understands financial investment, you can actually click in and see the methodology of how they came to these grades. But let's say, how about just click on that Nuveen ESG one there that's got a C rating. Yep. Yes, please. So this will tell you the fossil fuel holdings, how much is in each of the different fossil fuels. You can see this one has no coal industry investment, has some oil and gas, has some fossil fired utilities, but it doesn't have the top 30 coal fired utilities. You scroll on down, it gives you a little bit more information. And then keep scrolling down there for a minute. Yep. It'll give you a little bit more. So then it'll actually, that same one gives you grades in other aspects. So gender equality, whether they're in firearms, whether they're, they've got a really low rating in prison industrial. So you can look at other values besides climate change. It may not be only climate change you want to look at. It may be other values that you want to include when you think about that. So that's just, we can go back to the presentation, but that just gives you a quick look at that tool. It's a really robust tool, and you can show this to your financial advisor because they will be able to understand the methodology that this group used to actually get to those grades. And they, that can be really supportive of your financial advisor, because either they're going to feel confident by saying, well, yes, this is a good way of figuring this out, but I would also include X, or they're going to say, wow, this is really robust. I really appreciate you showing this to me. Yes. Well, there are some TIAA there may be some TIAA funds that are really good for the climate. Oh yeah, thanks, Judy. The question was, what if your financial advisor is in TIAA, if your investments are in TIAA? And I want to be clear that many of these funds have multiple sub funds. So your money may not be in one of the poor, wretched funds that's supporting climate change to an enormous amount. It actually might be, a lot of these funds have an ESG or an SRI fund that is really good for climate change. Just a quick note, the difference between ESG and SRI. ESG is a socially responsible fund that still prioritizes returns over values. And SRI tends to be a fund that still gets a good return, but prioritizes values over return. So that's a very broad generalization about those two terms. But from a lay person's perspective, that's, I don't understand enough to find the nuances between those funds, but I can tell you just in broad terms, that's what those are. Yes, another. Yes, I would go and take off your statement the precise fund. Don't just type TIAA, but when you put TIAA in, go in and see which TIAA fund it is, because it's possible that it's a good fund for climate. And this tool will show it to you. They've got every single one in there. So, yeah. But that's a good question. Yeah. So kind of to begin to wrap up here, and then we'll have some more discussion. Our abundance is kind of a form of energy in collaboration with the sun. I mean, at its most basic level, we've added our energy back in response to what at its root is sun energy. It's probably some derivative form of sun energy, but we've added our energy to that, and that's what's created the wealth that we enjoy in our life. And so the question is, what do we want to put that energy towards? Where do we want that to go? And how much were our values? How much energy are we willing to put in at this stage to make sure that the abundance we have goes towards what we want to see in the world? The best investment on earth is earth. Thank you. Let's open it up for questions and thoughts and comments. Yes.
Can you hear me? This is working? Okay. One thing, it's kind of an indirect investment in a way. I was just thinking, I'm a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists. And just one of the more recent things I got was, hooray, we just, at Hawaii, they just won a thing against the big oil companies about climate change. The oil companies finally had to admit that they're responsible for some of this stuff. So in a sense, it's kind of an indirect thing, but, supporting the Union of Concerned Scientists has helped get them pushed against the wall a little bit. So, and that's another where I felt kind of good about the investment. It's kind of how do you feel about that? I just wondered.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's really tragic and difficult about the climate change is how enormous it is and how overwhelming it is. It's so often that the more you learn and the more you study climate change, the more despairing and disappointment you can feel in your life. And so, but the good side of that is that pretty much anywhere you put a hand in, you're going to make a difference. And it might feel like a small difference, but it builds up. And so that's a great example of how supporting an organization of scientists who are working in a very strategic, methodical way they've done a whole lot. That organization, Union of Concerned Scientists, I'm aware of them. Also, I support them. They've done some great work. But there's a lot of ways that you could do that. And you might one way that you might think about your investments is you might take out a particular investment just to make a return that return is going to only support a given cause or a given group of people. Now, I know a few people have done that with the court cases for Line 3 resistors. So, a lot of the folks who stood on the front lines were folks that don't have investments or don't have a lot of abundance in their life. And now they're facing court cases with a lot of costs. And some folks have said, well, I'm just going to direct this little stream of income that I have from this investment to that work. Or perhaps you orient it towards some other work like community gardens in your community or something along those lines. Yeah. Great point. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a plug for talking to your advisor about what you're interested in. I did that. I've been doing it probably the last, 10 years. So gradually I've been able to change my investments to fossil fuel free and other, like tobacco or guns or that kind of thing. And the one that I've had for the last several years, it raised his awareness too, that people are interested in those kinds of investments. So he kind of did his own homework and spread the word too. So
Way to
it-
go.
it's a good thing to do.
That's fantastic. That means not only are you diverting your investments, but you're building some structural change with your advisor that's going to ripple out to other people. That's fantastic. Really good. I don't know about you, but I've always been kind of a nonprofit do-gooder and was always a little suspicious of the stock market and, felt intimidated by financial advisors and people in that arena. And then my brother became a financial advisor. My little brother. And then I realized, oh well, financial advisors are people too, and they have a certain level of training that comes from a certain perspective, which is designed to help people. They want to help people. They want to help them get the most for their money. So that's great. Good for them. They have an actual good hope for the world. But we do need to enlarge the perspective. We need to widen the perspective. My brother and I have had multiple conversations, and I said, yeah, well, if I get enormous returns, but I'm destroying the planet, and then I won't have anywhere to use those returns. I'll have to spend it all on fixing the planet. And that has been a good, lucrative and fruitful conversation in a lot of ways. Yes, Frank.
Well, yeah, it's complicated stuff. And I just got back from Washington, DC, where I was there for a conference for the charity called CARE, and we were doing advocacy for foreign assistance and all these issues. Of course, they're staggering. We got 8 billion people on this planet. The most optimistic people I know, there's one like Mark Jacobson at Stanford, says the ideal thing would be to go to a zero emissions world where everything is done by wind, solar, geothermal, probably tidal energy as well. And he feels we could do it in a couple of decades if we really worked at it, which I would love to see this be as ideal as possible. Others have just said it just is not realistic without talking about nuclear fission, that you just simply cannot, or at least some nuclear fission with the modern small modular reactors they're talking about to balance out the grid. And furthermore, obviously, batteries are mineral intensive, so are wind turbines. We would need to be looking at mining more things. At the same time, they're trying to get away from using lithium in batteries and going to other solid state or something that's better. But what's your thought? Obviously, social justice people for decades, my whole life, have been just not happy at all about nuclear fission, and just said we can't do it, don't want to do it. What are your thoughts? Or another thought has been, can we go to burning liquid fuels like liquid hydrogen, where you capture all the emissions on a vehicle? And maybe we just cannot get to the point where every vehicle and machine is electric, but obviously what we're trying to do is cut emissions more and more and more. And even if we can't go to zero emissions, cutting by 90% is a mammoth step in the right direction. So a little bit about that.
Yeah.
No easy answers.
Yeah. You bring up a lot of good points. On a real high note, I would say, look at California, which was just in the news last week that they've hit 3 days since April 30th, where the entire electrical needs of the entire state were provided by renewable energy. They went 100%. So, yeah. So it is possible. Now, that also means that, that was for a 6-hour period during the day. So, it isn't a silver bullet. As Bill McKibben, who I love to quote, says, it's, we don't have a silver bullet. We have silver buckshot, which means we got to have a lot of good ideas. I mean, they got to all work together. So nuclear fission might be one of them. Yes, environmentalists have long been against nuclear. They tended to be against yesterday's nuclear. The newer nuclear, maybe it's more nimble, maybe it's better, maybe it doesn't produce quite as much spent fuel. And spent fuel is a bit of a Faustian bargain. It lasts thousands of years. But the other problem with nuclear has been that it takes so long to build. It takes years. I talked to my dad. He lives in Georgia. Every time I talk to him, he's complaining about paying another $25 a month for the Vogtle nuclear plant, which is like 6 years over schedule and billions of dollars over budget. So it takes a long time to ramp up nuclear. Some of the more newer technologies might come online faster. We might need those, but those aren't going to solve the problem. We need lots of different solutions. And yeah, but like you say, hydrogen technology is growing. I know I have a friend whose daughter is at Harvard studying, trying to find the breakthrough on hydrogen. I'm sure she's one of hundreds of young scientists who are working on those types of problems. I mean, we do need to pursue all avenues of technology. We're going to need battery technology. We're going to need all kinds of technology. So we have to keep pursuing those in the context that we have such a finite time. We're talking decade, maybe 2 decades at best. And so we also need to couple that with reduction. We just need to, as people of faith who understand that the simple life is sometimes better than the grandiose life, we need to be promoting the simple life. The fact that we can actually have a more enjoyable, loving, caring life without all the things and that we spend. So it's, but you're right. It's going to be it's going to be everything. I mean, yeah. Yeah, go for it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about carbon offset. Could you just define what a carbon offset is? And does that have anything to do with with divestment? Is that a kind of divestment or?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Chris. A carbon offset is typically done, it can be done by a individual, but it's often done by a company. And what they propose to do is they know that their behavior or their way of producing goods or whatever their gift to the world is creates carbon emissions. And so instead of changing that behavior that eliminates that carbon emission, they do something different in another area that offsets that. So maybe, instead of flying their executives all around, instead of stopping flying all around the country for meetings, they calculate all the miles by airline, and then they purchase or give money in some other location that supports renewable energy or something. So they're not changing behavior to eliminate their carbon emissions, but they're doing something that essentially balances out the equation. Does that make sense?
So does that make a difference?
Well, it's better than nothing for sure. It's better than not doing anything. But ultimately, that depends on there being other places to reduce those carbon emissions, to make those offsets. Ultimately, we're going to have to just eliminate them if we really want to get to if we want to avoid the heating that our planet is facing. We're going to run out of space, so to speak, of ways to offset by going somewhere else rather than changing our behavior and eliminating our carbon. I mean, at this stage, there might be good reasons for that. It might be a transition mechanism to get to that. So I wouldn't say it's necessary. I wouldn't call it a bad thing, but it's more just, it's not enough thing. So another good example would be, St. Luke's has solar panels on their building. And anytime those panels produce more electricity than you use in this building, the excess is put back out onto the grid. So that's a fantastic thing because other people are getting to use that electricity that was created by renewable energy. But at some point, if everybody has solar panels, we won't have a way to store all that energy. We won't have a place to put that energy. It won't be an offset, so to speak. And what we'll need is a storage mechanism, a way to hold that energy until it's needed at a time when the lights, when the sun's not shining or something like that. So offsets can be kind of compared to that type of mechanism where for right now, with as much carbon emissions as we're creating, there are places that a company can go and not change their behavior and kind of buy their way out in some other place. But we're going to run out of places to buy out our behavior. We're going to have to actually change it.
I have kind of an in the weeds question, but about 5 years ago, I refinanced with Alaris and they immediately sold it to Chase. So am I guess pretty much stuck with that if they're holding
Yeah,
my
that's a
mortgage?
really good question. And it is deeper in the weeds than I can speak intelligently about. The one thing I would look to, though, is sometimes when those buyouts happen, the larger company that buys out has to abide by some of the assumptions that were built in, so if Alaris, said that they weren't in fossil fuels, then Chase may have had to buy them with the stipulations that any of that portfolio would never be in fossil fuels. I don't know if that's the case, but it might be, which make it a little bit better.
How can you find out?
I would check with your financial advisor. I think they're the ones that could tell you that. Yeah, they're probably more sophisticated than we are. But I just want to make sure I say before we run out of time, I would, this, you may feel like this is a small group of folks who have shown up for this workshop. No problem. Don't worry. Everything starts with a spark. And what I would encourage you to do as a church is, those of you who are in this room, over the next 3 months, 6 months, do some work on these. I will send you these tools, use these tools, go to your financial advisor. Some of you have already done that, as Judy's described her experience, and do some work on this. And then let's come back in 6 months and invite me back again. And then instead of me standing up here talking, how about you all be up here and describe your experience? How hard was it? What did you run into? Because then the rest of St. Luke's will get to hear from people they already know and trust and love. And you can be the catalyst for change for your whole community. And maybe even invite some other churches to come, that kind of thing. But we really do have to band together to support one another to figure this out. And so, I'd invite you to consider doing that as a way to carry this forward.
I have a question. Can you recommend, is there an investment firm that specializes? I mean, it's been really a struggle with the two investment firms that we work with. They're not attuned to this at all. And it's just, it seems like, there's a roll of the eyes and, well, if you do this, you're not going to get this kind of return. And, and then this is going to happen. And it's just become such a headache to have this debate with these investment companies each time. And it would just be easier to walk into a friendly environment than to debate the returns on this or that, when in effect, I don't think they really know or understand fossil free, and they're just looking at, who's kind of the big players out there. So it'd be easier if there was an investment firm that it wouldn't have to be their whole business, but if they at least understood what they were talking about.
Lori, that's a great question. Yeah. In case anybody didn't hear that on Zoom, Lori's asking is there a firm in the area that kind of specializes in fossil free or good values investing. Yes, great question. I don't have one right at the moment. I've been digging through the archives of the Star Tribune from the fall because I read an article about one in the business section that specialized in this. I also haven't looked into whether we can, as a nonprofit, promote a particular financial advisor. So I haven't done that homework either, but I'm working on that. So hopefully, I can come back to you in a month with a recommendation along those lines.
Great.
But this reminds me of a quick little story I'll tell you. My wife goes to the farmer's market all the time, and she loves to buy maple syrup from this one maple syrup buyer. And she likes the grade B because it's a little thicker, heavier, has more iron in it. And she's asking this guy for the grade B. And he says, yes, okay, I've got grade B. I'll give you some. And she said, can I get that in glass? And he said, oh God, you granola crunchy people with your grade B, all the grade B people want it in glass. We already know that. We've got it in glass. We'll get you the glass. Okay. So my point is, like, other people had asked him for glass. It wasn't an outlandish thing. And so I think and this is a local farmer, I mean, this isn't rocket science. So I think over time, financial advisors are going to have to get with this. And they may not be, there are going to be more and more options for what you're asking about. People that specialize in this or have prepared this and know how to do it. Yeah.
Just a note. No, that's okay. I live in the country, and there's lots of folks that do maple syruping, and almost all of them have switched to glass.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and not always. Some of them very yes, they've always used glass. Others begrudgingly, but they've switched to glass.
Yeah. I see in the chat, Evelyn says, Ameriprise Beth Willis has been very responsive. She was originally recommended by Bob Coothill and others. She commented, these religious folks actually want to live their values. All right. That's great. So there's somebody. That's good. Thank you, Evelyn. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks for, what about restricting air travel? Yes. I forget the exact percentage, but air travel can be a large carbon emissions source in your life. Depending on who you are and what you're, if you're single and, you're pretty simple in your lifestyle, air travel might be an enormous portion. If you're a family of 4 or 5 and you're doing a ton of activity and you're heating a big house and all those, air travel might be a smaller portion of your carbon emissions. But it is an enormous amount of emissions. And so there are ways that you can, again, net zero by offsets. So, if you have to travel, there are ways that you can buy out and support some renewable energy to offset those that carbon emissions. But in general, it is a big source of carbon emissions. So if you can avoid flying, it's great. Yeah, let's wrap up because I know you're all about to head to worship. But thanks a lot for inviting me here, and good luck in your moving forward.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, you're going to send out the links to all those websites.
I'll send it to
Okay.
you.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Okay.
So this has been very rich. Thank you so much.
All right. My name is Buff.
Yeah,
Grace. Yep.
bye.